Good morning, everybody. Awesome. It's so great to see some familiar and new faces in the house. I'm really excited to kick off a super early morning panel. This is Miami time, so it's bright and early. And I'd love you to welcome to the stage Laura Maydon, who is the managing director of Endeavor Miami. Let's give her a round of applause. A real Miami superstar. And next, I'll welcome to the stage Pamela Fuertes, who is the Director of Economic Development for the City of Coral Gables. You all know Pamela really well. Let's give her a round of applause. And next, a dear friend and collaborator, and really a trailblazer in Miami's innovation community. Let's welcome CEO of Venture Hive, Dr. Susan Amat. And I'd also like for you to put your hands together for Santiago Canejo, who is the COO of the Venture City. Let's welcome him. And last, but certainly not least, the mayor of the city of Doral, Juan Bermudez. Let's also welcome him. And this is very spread out.
I was going to sit by you, but I got scared.
Aw, Susan, why don't you come join me right in the center? So we don't have this empty seat. Okay, we'll bounce it.
You come over here and I'll...
This is really collaboration in action. And so this conversation is one that I think is very timely. Miami is the county and the city and even the region is really having a spotlight on a lot of the innovation and entrepreneurship activity that we have going on. Although a lot of us have some conversations about our recognition as the #1 city for startup activity in the United States, I think the better conversation that we ought to be having is scale up. And I know Endeavor does a lot of work around scaling up. But really, let's do some level setting. We use the term innovation, and this panel is really about what can we do to break down some of the barriers to innovation in Miami? But oftentimes the word innovation is something like we all don't understand. We have very different definition of what innovation means. So I'd like for us to kick off this panel by really level setting. If we can start right here with Juan Carlos, how do you define innovation? And then what does that mean as it relates to your particular role as a member of this innovation ecosystem in Miami?
Well, first of all, Leigh-Ann, thank you for the opportunity to be here with Unbound Miami and with such a distinguished panel, who I've known for a long time. On the government side, innovation, I think, means efficiency and effectiveness. It means doing things in a more effective manner from the perspective of carrying out the day-to-day activity of governmental requirements and needs for our constituents, our visitors, and in Doral, such a large business community. But also as a public official, one of the things that's important to me, having grown up in South Florida, is to make sure that we have the type of industries that can compete not only with the rest of the country, but the rest of the world. So my daughters can stay in South Florida instead of having to go to another city, either go to Silicon Valley or go to Boston or go somewhere else. So I think innovation, which can be described in many different ways, and today we look at it mostly technologically, and rightly so, because the speed has been so great of technological advancement, also should include things like opportunities for younger entrepreneurs, the possibility of, and from the government side, the efficiency is important, because one of the problems we have in South Florida, not just in Doral, but in the city of Miami, and I would say the Tri-County area, is the issue of keeping talent local and attracting new talent here. And I think that's why, from our perspective as government, it's efficiency, effectiveness, but also creating the circumstances where people can come and have innovative industries, new industries in South Florida.
So Juan Carlos, that's a really interesting definition of innovation, tied importantly to the industries that we elevate, and we're gonna put a push pin on that to talk a little bit more, but also like the concept of sustainability. You know, how do we create a sustainable environment so that it's multi-generational? So it's not just for what's happening today, but what's for happening in the future. So Pamela, how do you begin to define innovation also in kind of a government perspective, and how does that inform the work that the City of Coral Gables is doing in this space?
Well, thank you so much. I'd like to begin by echoing the mayor's comments about it gives me tremendous satisfaction to be on part of this panel, and thank you for the invitation. For the City of Coral Gables, the word innovation is extremely important because it's really at the center of everything that we do. I mean, we as a municipality and as a member of this business community, we really think that innovation is at the center of everything that we do. For us, technology is embedded in every facet of what the city does. And for us, as you know, outlined, it's important for our local leadership, it's important for our local community, businesses and residents alike. And so for us, we look at it as an opportunity to really think innovatively, to think more nimbly, to be a little bit more agile, and to be really at the front of some of the changes that we see happening in our community. You know, what's really important to see and exciting is just how many different points of intersection there are at the moment in Miami-Dade County in general. We see the rise of all of these different industries. We see, you know, conversations like these, conferences like these taking place, and we just think that it's really critically important for us to be competitive and to be an active member of the community for both the public and the private sector to really embrace innovation at every level of our municipal, but as well as corporate citizenship.
So if I hear you correctly, Pamela, innovation is in part about intersectionality. How do we pull from very disparate areas and create something new? But in part, innovation is about mindset. So it's not just in the doing, but in the thinking, and really how we can adopt an innovative mindset. Susan, how do you define innovation, and how does that play a role in the work? Just explaining a little bit more about what Venture Hive is doing to build the local ecosystem, but also create connections globally.
So innovation is adding value to a process, system, technology, et cetera. It really is about making change to make something better, faster, cheaper with some kind of return. And that return can be defined in a variety of ways. That's the academic answer. We set out 6 years ago to create that nexus of having a place to recruit talent from all over the world in industry verticals where it made sense to be in Miami-Dade County. And at that point, it was really not just about innovation, but entrepreneurship, which are two completely separate topics. Over the course of the last few years, what I've seen as the real opportunity, especially in South Florida around innovation, is having corporates, partners like the county and different cities, municipalities, being able to actually test and pilot new things here from all over the world and be more open to being that place where new innovation can test and pilot, not just because of our location, but because of our demographics. So a lot of our work tends to focus on the culture building and training of being able to create better innovative processes. For instance, we're the local partners for the Ford Innovation Challenge. Yeah. The winner, and there were applicants from all over the world, but the winner will be able to pilot something in Miami-Dade County in partnership with the county government. And this is a really great example when whether it's a city, whether it's the county, whether it's a local corporation, when we find these innovators, when we find people who are trying to do new things, but they can't access pilot opportunities, they can get funding somewhere else if they need to. But if we can't get good pilots here, if they can't sell in less than 6 months, it's going to be very hard to keep our community moving forward. So that's what we spend the majority of our time on, prepping companies startups to be able to sell in, and helping corporations, municipalities to be able to actually do proper due diligence, open their minds up, and be able to take in, whether it's for a pilot or integrations, to be able to move things forward and make things more efficient for all of us.
Excellent. And so, Susan, it's really in part about kind of partnership and process improvement and really supporting both sides of the equation. The entrepreneur or the company that has a great, innovative, more nimble product, and also the implementer who's going to be able to partner and use it. And I like that you drew a distinction between innovation and entrepreneurship, because that oftentimes is something that's conflated, which gives us a really natural segue to the work that Laura does with high impact entrepreneurs. But if you would, kind of break down a little bit more the distinction between innovation, how that plays a role in your work, and then talk a little bit about really the impact that your high impact entrepreneurs are having in Miami.
Great, thank you. I think first that in this changing environment, right? I mean, what we have is constant change. Innovation is the ability to assess while you're moving fast on whether you need to adapt and change, right? And that assessment and that the ability to make that decision in constant change, I think makes something innovative or not, with the idea to be more effective and add more value, right? So at the end of the day, you want to change to continue to be relevant. And I think also in the context of leadership and entrepreneurship, it means the ability to embrace different ideas. And as you embrace those ideas and you listen to them, it's the ability to make decisions on the spot on how to move forward. And I think that's very relevant for us. Endeavor Miami, as Leigh-Ann mentioned, is about high-impact entrepreneurship. We look for entrepreneurs that are at the point of scale across industries, not only tech. And I think our work is, for us, what's important is to enable our entrepreneurs to be innovative and to continue to be relevant in an emerging ecosystem, right? Which I think we all know that ecosystems, entrepreneurial ecosystems, as they start and then continue to grow, the resources are not readily available. And Endeavor, what we do through Endeavor work is to connect entrepreneur to resources to be able to scale. And scale is relevant because companies that scale generate more jobs and produce more wealth for our economy. So that's why the focus of our work within the context of innovation and the ability to innovate is very relevant for South Florida.
Thank you, Laura. And I want to turn it over to Santiago, and I really like that you kind of referred to the changing environment. One definition I heard through a workshop with Venture City about entrepreneurship, it's really creating the tool set or the skills to be able to navigate uncertainty and to really understand how to allow business to accelerate and grow despite not necessarily knowing the environment in which you're going to be operating. So, Santiago, how do you define innovation, and how does that play a role in informing the work that Venture City is doing in Miami?
All right, thanks for having us here. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I agree mostly with everything that has been said before. For us in the Venture City, innovation is kind of a simple definition. Is our ability or the ability of founders to transform ideas into solutions that add value to the customers. And those customers may be like individual customers or businesses, no? We are focusing, of course, in innovations that are related with technology, because that's the business that we are into. But basically, what we expect is to have ideas that through technology are able to scale rapidly. And those ideas need to add up some kind of value to that end user that is going to be, judging whether if the innovation has been really achieved or not. No, it's not an easy process, because I think that sometimes it's not just about generating the ideas. It's a long-term journey that all the entrepreneurs need to somehow plan ahead. It requires a lot of time, a lot of investment in people and in technology, and it also requires to be open to gather, as you were saying before, like ideas or comments or the help from other around you, not only your own company, but companies, public and private companies that can give you the extra help that you're going to need in order to fine-tune your product or service.
Excellent. And I love that you talked a lot about innovation being a process that pulls in the expertise and insights of those around you. So Venture Café, for those who don't know, we are focused on really building an inclusive and diverse innovation ecosystem in Miami. And that's done in a way where we put partnership and collaboration at the forefront. And I'm really excited to see that most of the folks on the stage we've partnered with. And we fundamentally believe, and I agree with some of the definitions of innovation that we've all heard here today, that it's really a social process. And it's one that is fueled by collaboration, kind of proper storytelling, and some degree of trust that we are all in this for the right reasons and to execute on a similar vision. And so the reason why I started with the definitions of innovation is to illustrate the point that there are many different perspectives. And part of the conversation here today, the framing of this panel, that we all got the kind of little blurb, it was, is Miami the next Silicon Valley? And that's something we hear a lot, always comparing us to the Valley. And I wonder, from the perspective of our panelists, if that's the appropriate approach. Should we be benchmarking against Silicon Valley? Why or why not? Or should we be focusing on our own value proposition? So I'll actually switch things up, and I'll start with Laura and move on to Susan, and then we'll continue.
Okay, I think in the context of studying and understanding what makes relevant entrepreneurial ecosystem, it makes sense to look around and see, how and why entrepreneurs have thrived. Endeavor is an organization that was founded 20 years ago and started in emerging ecosystems. So I think as an organization, we have a lot of knowledge and what entrepreneurs and founders and communities need to grow. Having said that, I don't think we need to be the same as any other ecosystem, right? I think we're very fortunate to have a lot of resources that are very unique to Miami. I think we're naturally diverse, and as I mentioned before, diversity of ideas and backgrounds fosters innovation, so I think that's an asset that we have. We're uniquely geographically positioned. We have an amazing quality of life. Those are things that founders take into account, to stay in a community. I think we, as an emerging ecosystem and as we're growing, and if you think, this is Endeavor's 5th anniversary, more or less, obviously Susan started earlier, but I think that in the context of a growing entrepreneurial community, we're still in the early stages, right? I mean, we've grown, and I, like to say that, we're really trying to pass the, teenager, stage and to become adults. And we still need to demonstrate as an ecosystem that our companies can grow, that we have the resources to, help them accelerate, to create those jobs, to attract those jobs, to create that wealth, right? To attract that capital. So I think we have great traction. I think we can be our own. And I think we're defining ourselves. And I think we are already proving that we're very different and have assets that we need to take advantage of.
Susan, I'm curious from your perspective, because you're really one of those people that have been here kind of the longest. And I'm sure you often see us compared to other ecosystems where you might work, nationally and around the world. How should we be intentional about defining our role, and how should we be communicating that?
We've been talking about if Miami's the next Silicon Valley for a decade. It's literally the most annoying question I can think of. Miami has demographics and really unique value propositions that no other country in the world has. And as a starting point for foreign companies to come in and be able to not just test and validate the US market and Latin American market opportunities, but to understand what the US demographics are going to look like in 15, 20 years and prepare for that properly, no one else has that value proposition. And it's extremely frustrating as someone who has been building programs and telling the story of Miami globally now for over a decade, to see we keep going back to, are we at the next tech hub? It doesn't matter. Entrepreneurs out there, build good companies and stop thinking about how close to Silicon Valley we're going to be. Just build good companies that solve a problem, and don't think about funding as your metric for success. Get revenue by solving someone's problem and they will pay you. That's it. And once people do that and focus on building solutions that solve problems, we are going to be fantastic, and we'll earn some of the awards that we have already been gotten. To say that we're the #1 startup city in the country, their metrics, and I love the Kauffman Foundation. I have very close friends there. I have been a consultant there for a number of years on all the nerdy data type stuff. The metrics are so flawed on that study. And when we look at that and people say, we're the #1 city for startups, we've been the #1 micro business city for 2 decades. People start little tiny companies here that are lifestyle businesses. That's already been happening. We just changed micro business to startup. Build companies that solve problems. And job creation, I think it's a very important thing, but if you're doing well, you may be able to find efficiencies to not have to add more jobs. It really depends on the kind of business you have. When you look at a company like Plenty of Fish, they were able to build a $20, $30 million company over the span of 3 years with 3 people. That's deficiency. So I think what we have to get back to is put your head down, build good companies that solve problems, and find people to pay you before you get an investor. And then if you need an investor, awesome. And have traction and validation that what you have exists. Don't play with other people's money.
I think
Sorry,
that's really
I'm very
well
frustrated.
said. And I knew you were going to say that, so it's kind of a little bit of a setup. Because I think we need to be more honest and authentic about these conversations instead of really kind of playing into an...
You knew I was going to say that?
Yes.
Am I that broken recordy at this point?
No, we've just had many conversations. But I do want, I think it's important that we take these opportunities to be very honest. And so shifting gears more to the government perspective, similarly, how are you telling your story of the opportunity that the city of Coral Gables or the city of Doral, the opportunity that exists for people that want to have their heads down, build companies that actually solve problems, and actually scale up, because that's what we really need to be thinking about.
You got
Yes, thank you so much. Well, I think, for us at the City of Coral Gables, first of all, innovation is really, going back to that question for a second, it's an economic imperative. And Miami's greatest advantage for us is our multicultural community and the fact that we have such a strong presence from an international perspective. And that's good for Doral, that's good for the city of Coral Gables, good for city of Miami, and for all of our other municipalities and region, frankly. So from that perspective, I'm not too much into comparisons. I totally agree. I think Miami stands on its own, and we have a lot of very important advantages that no other community or city has, states including. And so I think, what's really interesting for us as an indicator is just to see how much is going on in Miami. Hong Kong, coming to say, hey, we want to be in Miami, we want to do something, let's collaborate. Italy, France, Spain. I mean, look around this panel and ask each one of us where we've been and where we're going to our next conference. You'll see that. And so for us, I think it's about really capturing that momentum and being an active part of the business community so that we can help propel and leverage the message about how great our community is, because it's important to know that it's for the benefit of all in the community, all of, this whole leverage and momentum. So,
Juan Carlos?
Yeah, Leigh-Ann, I think that Susan and Laura and Pamela all said clearly we don't want to be the next Silicon Valley because we are our own. We have a unique circumstance geographically on the diversity side. So I think we could be something different, and we should be something different. Now, from the government side, we've gone from a economic model that for many years in South Florida relied on construction and tourism to something that now includes much more of a diverse perspective. I think that and Susan hit the nail on the head on some of this, we also have to be cognizant of, if we are going to be the place that uniquely is positioned to be different and we are going to have the economic growth we would like to see, then we have to create a partnership between the public and the private sector to be more effective. One of the greatest frustrations I have, and I was lucky to be the founding mayor of the city of Doral, and by the way, some of you who don't go west of the I-95 or the Palmetto, come by. We're the third largest producer for the county. We have a downtown area. We're the only city that has commercial, industrial, and a residential base, and the second lowest millage rate in Miami-Dade County. So paid political advertisement. But anyways, bottom line is, when we started creating the city, we had the vision to create that downtown 15 years ago because we felt we wanted to have the ability to try to attract an Amazon-type entity. It wasn't Amazon at the time, but a large business. And that's how we ended up being one of the 2 areas in South Florida that were being considered. But I do think that there has to be a greater partnership between the public and the private sector. In my real life, I'm a lawyer on the private sector side. One of the greatest frustrations I have, being on the U.S. Conference of Mayors Board before and now again, is to see that in this community, the private sector is in its own silo and the government is in its own silo. That is a tremendous frustration. I know we're going to hear all these wonderful things about the county. Listen, the reality is the private sector and the public sector too many times are in their own silo in this county. And until we look into, and then we got other issues. We got to be realistic too. If we're going to be, like Susan says, realistic about the issues, traffic, quality of life, healthcare, there are things, affordable or workforce housing, whatever you want to call it. We need to find some of those solutions, but it can't come by having the governmental entity in its own silo and the private sector in its own.
I think that's a great insight. At Venture Cafe, we always say that we're in the business of breaking down silos, and that is done by creating meaningful connections with purpose around really addressing some of the gaps that exist in our community. So that segues into, yes, we're talking about how great Miami
I
is.
have a silo comment.
Okay, Susan.
So I think that I've seen at play the government, even with the mayor of Coral Gables and with our mayor of the county and the mayor of the city, they're making incredible inroads to break down the silos. The challenge is pace, because entrepreneurs are building things, wanting to test and validate, wanting feedback, and waiting 2, 3, 4 months for answers and even a decision process, because whether it's private or public sector, they don't have systems in place to properly even diligence or even understand what they're looking for, and it just gets deferred through meetings, is really problematic. So hanging out and having meetings is not breaking down the silos. Having systems by which you can actually tell an entrepreneur in their eyes, this will take 4 months, bear with us, here's the process. Having some transparency to it, that's what's really going to move the needle.
And so you gave us a segue into the next question, to be quite honest. One of the ways we're at Venture Cafe thinking about how we can be that connector is to create those simple sprints for that type of process to happen. Kind of talking to county government and saying, what is one discrete pain point that you have, and how can we be a facilitator of a process for you to better connect with the entrepreneurs that may have the solution and help guide that interaction so that it actually happens in a timely manner. So for us, that's one of the barriers that we see. The question that I have for everybody on the panel is, let's be real for a second and talk about what are some significant, tangible barriers that prevent us from having a more cohesive and effective innovation and entrepreneurship community. And we'll start with Laura again, because I know you were going to say something, so we'll give you that platform.
I think it's on the same topic. I think that if we want to break silos or work more in partnership to really drive change, we'll need to honestly sit down and think about incentives, right? And create a plan, for the next 5 years, as opposed to make decisions for the short term, right? So when I look from the entrepreneur's point of view, growing a company in South Florida or in Miami, right? I think that they get very different attention and incentives versus larger companies. And so, I think that if we really want to work together in, public and private sector, right, those type of things, we have to be realistic about it, right? And then we have to create an opportunity which might not have a very, an immediate return or a short-term return to really foster those smaller companies to grow. So one barrier would be In the case of our entrepreneurs, it's just like the ability to work and grow and do it within the process and as fast as they can, if they need to go through, permits and things, that's mostly on the brick and mortar side. In general, I would think that, I think that we've always talked, in the case of Endeavor, we'll look at ecosystems, in different dimensions, and we'll look at access to mentors and advisors, access to talent, which it's, in the past few years, we've talked a lot about talent, and access to capital. And I think that we've progressed and we've broken silence in access to mentorship. I think people are willing to help, and we have an amazing, seasoned and, business and entrepreneurial community that's helping others, at least in our experience, to help entrepreneurs scale. I think these entrepreneurs, as they grow, will attract more and more talent, and I think it's evident that we're earning that, I think we could, talk about how we attract other type of talents that are needed. And then the third pillar is capital. I think that, Susan made a great point. I think that when companies grow and prove value, they attract capital. It's still slower. It's still different for an entrepreneur that grows a company here versus a mature ecosystem. So we need to be able to bridge that gap.
Excellent. And we are going to get to a couple more topics. And also, if you have questions, please go to slido.com, #UnboundMiami, and ask your questions. So, Santiago, one barrier. Tell us one barrier.
Let me just add one more thing to Laura's point, which I agree completely. I think that every city, including Miami, needs to look at this on a very long-term basis. This is going to happen in a few years' time. The cities that started earlier have achieved greater results. That's obvious. And one more element that I think that every city like Miami should include in their proposition from the very beginning is education. I think that education is mandatory. There are a lot of gaps today in every level of the education system. I think that Miami has a good opportunity to solve this gap, and there are a lot of things going on in high schools and at the university level, that they are building these new courses, associate programs related with entrepreneurship and innovation, and I think that that's going to be a major ingredient for every city that really wants to do something in the future about innovation.
So we've heard quite a few of the specific barriers: education/talent, access to capital, kind of partnership with government around pilots. How do we then think about an incentive environment, infrastructure that helps companies to accelerate their growth faster? But a lot of times we talk about these concepts just conceptually, and we don't tie it back to benchmarks or measures or data. And so I'm going to shift to you, Susan, because I know data is a topic that you talk about a lot, you care about. And so the question is, we talk about some of these barriers. How do we then create strategies to use data to measure where we are now, project out where we should be, and then begin to use data as a tool of accountability for eliminating some of the barriers to innovation that exist in our region?
Are you talking about an innovation tracking system for an ecosystem?
Yes.
I don't believe that can be done properly because, this is all I do all day. I think that at the individual company level, there needs to be better tracking of process. I think that any corporation who wants to track innovation more efficiently, whether it's external or internal, needs to have better documentation, conflict of interest control, et cetera. I want to touch upon your last question around what we need to do that's different. We need to follow up and be honest. And if those two things happen, I think we're on our way to being one of the greatest cities in the world for entrepreneurship and innovation, period. Write emails back. Make sure that if you can't do something in time, manage expectations properly. It's those little things that I think have caused a lot of people to question our ability as a community to be as good as we can be. There's a lot of incredible talent here. And one of the things that we partnered with Enterprise Florida and the governor earlier this year to build a virtual soft landing program for companies from all over the world to be able to enter Florida. Miami's not the top city for many of them anymore, because when they start interacting with people from Orlando and Tampa who have incredible technology and are, this is not an ecosystem question. This is a, where is my company going to have the best opportunity? And that means individuals following through, being able to find good talent who actually follows through and spell checks their resumes and spell checks their emails back. It's the little things, because it's all about the attention to detail and showing that we're going to be excellent all the time. So to answer your metrics question though, I don't believe that can exist, because there are too many variables to have to control, and private companies should not have to share what's maybe happening in their business for the sake of everyone else to then have some kind of measurement and report.
Excellent. So we're almost out of time, but I'm going to wrap it up with one quick rapid fire set of questions. So diversity and inclusion and equity are always at the forefront of what we're talking about in Miami. Can you give us a quick takeaway on what your grade would be for Miami on inclusion and equity, and in a tweet size statement, not the 240 characters, but the 120 characters, why? And we'll start right here.
Tell me the question again.
What's the grade, A, B, C, D, E, or A, B, C, D, F, on inclusion or diversity, and why, in a tweet size?
I would say the grade is probably a B. I think we're one of the most diverse communities. I'll speak for Doral, which is over 90 different nationalities, but Miami-Dade is over 150. Where I see the problem is tweet size is younger people. We need to make sure that we maintain that diversity by having the diverse community we have stay here, not go to other cities like Atlanta, Boston, Houston, other places.
Pamela, what's our grade, and in a tweet-sized statement?
So I'm a little more optimistic. I would say I think an A. I think Miami is really the standard for diversity and inclusion. There's a lot of work to be done, but we're well on the way. And I think we have all those different elements. I would say that we need to bridge the gap in talent. I think that there's a really strong opportunity to bridge the academic institutions with our private sector, and I think that'll help answer a lot of the questions that we talked about today. We have an advisory council that talks. I'm out of time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very quick statement, Susan. How are we doing on diversity, equity, and inclusion? If you had to give a grade.
I think we have an A. Every single event I go to has less white men than any other group, period, including women at this point. It's we need to get more white men involved in the scene. So yeah, that's it.
Okay. Laura.
So I think from 1 to 10, sorry, I mean, I grew up in Mexico. From 1 to 10, diversity, I think we got a 10. I think inclusion we score really low. I do think there's a distinct, we need to make more efforts to be inclusive of all of our communities. I think there's great effort and great partners, but we're still not there yet.
Santiago.
I will give a A for diversity, a B for inclusion too. I think that there's a lot of room to improve there.
And I would give us, an A for diversity and maybe a C for inclusion. A friend of mine says that, I'll tell you why.
Question you on that. Go ahead, let's hear it.
A friend of mine says that it is, diversity is inviting you to the party, and inclusion is asking you to dance. And I think there's many parts of our community, and we're not just talking about racial or ethnic, but we're talking about all indicators of lines of difference, including kind of economic background, whether or not you have a disability, that we could level up in terms of including them meaningfully.
And that's the beautiful thing about entrepreneurship. Nothing is stopping you from starting your own company and deciding who you want to dance with.
Thank you very much.